What if the history we've been taught is wrong? What if the foundation of our entire understanding of the human past rests on a fundamental mistake? For centuries, we have pieced together the story of civilization from fragments of pottery, crumbling ruins, and half-remembered myths. But what if one of those fragments, one single artifact discovered in the dust of ancient Mesopotamia, doesn't just add to our story but threatens to shatter it completely? This isn't a question of adjusting a date by a few decades or reinterpreting a battle. This is about a document that dares to tell a story so bizarre, so utterly impossible by our modern standards, that it has been quietly sidelined, dismissed as pure fantasy by mainstream historians. Yet, what if it's not fantasy? What if this ancient list is a record of a truth we are no longer equipped to understand? This artifact is the Sumerian King List, and it is arguably one of the most controversial and baffling texts ever unearthed. Imagine a simple clay tablet, inscribed with the careful cuneiform script of a long-vanished scribe. On its surface, it appears to be a straightforward record, a royal lineage of the kings who ruled the fabled cities of Sumer before the Great Flood swept across the world. But a closer look reveals something that defies all logic. This is not a list of kings who ruled for 20 or 50 years. According to this ancient ledger, the earliest monarchs held power for spans of time that stretch into the realm of mythology. We are talking about reigns that lasted for tens of thousands of years. One king is said to have ruled for 28,000 years, another for 36,000. These are not typos or exaggerations. They are stated as simple, matter-of-fact truths. This document presents a pre-flood world governed by beings of impossible longevity, a reality that stands in stark opposition to everything we think we know about human history. So we are left with a profound and haunting mystery. Is the Sumerian King List merely an elaborate piece of political propaganda designed to legitimize later dynasties by connecting them to a godlike mythical past? Or could it be a corrupted memory of something far more extraordinary? Perhaps it is a glimpse into a forgotten epoch, a time when the rules of biology and time were fundamentally different. The implications are staggering, suggesting the existence of a lost civilization, advanced beyond our comprehension, whose true history has been reduced to a list of names and numbers that we can no longer decipher. In this video, we will embark on a journey to unravel the secrets of this forbidden history. We will explore the shocking claims of the list, examine the arguments of both skeptics and those who believe it holds a kernel of truth, and ask the most dangerous question of all: what if we are the ones who have forgotten our own past? The story of this enigmatic document truly begins not in the dusty plains of ancient Sumer, but in the archaeological fervor of the early 20th century. It was in 1922, amid the ruins of the ancient city of Lhasa in what is now Iraq, that an object of profound historical significance was unearthed. This was not a simple, flat tablet, but something far more unique and durable, a clay prism about the size of a large fist, known today as the Weld-Blundell Prism. Named after its donor, Herbert Weld-Blundell, who sponsored the excavation, this artifact is a masterpiece of ancient record-keeping. Its shape is key to its purpose. It's a four-sided prism, with each face offering a slightly convex surface, meticulously inscribed from top to bottom with the precise, wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform script. This was not a document meant to be broken easily. Its form suggests it was intended to be rolled like a tiny clay barrel, allowing a scribe or a reader to rotate it and follow the text continuously, a clever design for preserving a king list that was meant to last for eternity. The initial reaction among the scholars who first laid eyes on its inscriptions was a mixture of sheer excitement and profound bewilderment. Here was a text that seemed to confirm the historical existence of legendary cities like Eridu, Bad Tabira, and Larak, places that had until then resided largely in the realm of myth. But that excitement was quickly tempered by the numbers. As they translated the text, they encountered those impossible reigns, the kings who governed for periods longer than all of recorded history. This created an immediate and deep schism in interpretation. For some, it was an incredible find, a direct window into the Sumerians' own conception of their deep past. For others, it was an embarrassing anomaly, a piece of obvious mythology that had to be explained away. The prism didn't just present a list, it presented a fundamental challenge to the emerging field of scientific archaeology, which was trying to ground human history in tangible, evidence-based timelines. Today, this crucial artifact resides in the Ashmolean Museum at the University of Oxford, a silent but powerful witness to a forgotten age. Its importance cannot be overstated. While fragments of the Sumerian King List have been found on other tablets, the Weld-Blundell Prism is by far the most complete and detailed version in existence. It contains the entire narrative from the descent of kingship from heaven to the post-flood dynasties, creating a continuous line of supposed authority. This completeness is precisely what makes it so central to the mystery. A fragment might be dismissed as a local legend or a scribble error, but the prism presents a coherent, systematic, and unflinching chronology. It forces us to confront its claims head-on. Why would a civilization as sophisticated and administratively meticulous as the Sumerians go to such lengths to preserve a record they knew to be false? The very existence of this carefully crafted prism suggests that, for its creators, this was not a fanciful tale, but a foundational truth. It is the bedrock upon which the entire enigma is built, a physical object that bridges our world and a past that seems impossibly remote. In Eridu, Ululim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. Let that number truly settle in your mind for a moment. That is a span of time longer than the entire history of agriculture, longer than all of recorded human civilization up to this very day. The list continues unflinching. Alalga, the next king, ruled for 36,000 years. Then kingship was moved to the city of Bad Tabera, where 3 successive kings reigned. Enmen-Lu honor for 43,200 years, Enmen-Gal honor for 28,800 years, and the shepherd Dumuzid for a comparatively brief 36,000 years. The numbers are so vast, so consistent in their enormity, that they cease to feel like history and begin to feel like cosmology. In total, the King List records 8 monarchs who ruled 5 different cities before the Great Flood swept over the land. Their combined reigns add up to an astonishing 241,200 years. This pre-flood section concludes with a stark and terrifying statement: "Then the flood swept over the earth." It's a line that echoes cataclysmic myths from cultures across the globe, but here it serves as a definitive dividing line in history, and this is where the list takes a dramatic and crucial turn. After the waters recede, kingship is once again lowered from heaven, this time to the city of Kish, but the world has changed. The new post-flood kings, while still possessing reigns that seem long to us, operate on a completely different timescale. The first king of Kish, Joshua, is said to have ruled for 1,200 years. His successor ruled for 960 years, still impossibly long by our standards, but a fraction of the pre-flood timelines. As the list progresses further, the reigns grow progressively shorter, slowly compressing from centuries down to decades, eventually aligning with lifespans we would recognize as human. This stark contrast is the heart of the mystery. It's as if the document itself is signaling that something fundamental about the world, or about its rulers, was irrevocably altered by the flood. The pre-flood era is portrayed as a distinct age of giants, a time of beings who existed on a scale we can scarcely comprehend, followed by a gradual decline into the mortal reality we inhabit today. This isn't just a list of names, it's a narrative of a lost golden age and a great fall. Faced with these impossible numbers, mainstream historians and archaeologists have proposed a compelling and logical explanation. They suggest that we are making a fundamental error by reading the King List as a literal, historical document in the modern sense. Instead, they argue, we should view it through the lens of the culture that produced it. In the worldview of ancient Mesopotamia, numbers often carried profound symbolic and political weight, far beyond their simple mathematical value. A king ruling for 36,000 years was not a statement of biological fact, but a powerful claim about his legitimacy, his connection to the gods, and the perceived stability and antiquity of his city-state. These enormous figures are interpreted as a form of political propaganda, a way for later dynasties to anchor their own authority in a deep, almost timeless past, thereby making their rule seem inevitable and divinely sanctioned. This symbolic interpretation gains traction when we consider the context of competing city-states in Sumer. Each major urban center, like Uruk or Kish, would have had its own legends and royal lineages. The King List can be seen as an attempt to weave these disparate local traditions into a single, unified narrative of kingship that cycled from one city to the next. The incredibly long reigns of the earliest kings served to magnify the prestige of the entire institution of kingship itself. By claiming that kingship descended from heaven and was first exercised by rulers of such immense duration, the scribes were effectively saying that the very concept of a king was ancient, powerful, and ordained by the gods. The gradual shortening of reigns after the flood could then symbolize a slow decline from this idealized, mythic age into the more turbulent, historical era that the scribes themselves were living in. Furthermore, some scholars point to the specific numbers themselves, noting patterns that suggest a mathematical rather than a historical basis. The reigns often appear in multiples of 600, which was the number of years in a Sumerian cosmological cycle known as the Sar. This unit was tied to their complex base 60 numerical system and their astronomical observations. A reign of 36,000 years, for instance, is exactly 10 Sars. This repetition of significant numerical units strongly implies that the figures were chosen for their symbolic perfection, representing complete cycles of time rather than being the result of actual record-keeping. From this perspective, the King List is not a flawed history book, but a sophisticated theological and political text, using the language of numbers to convey ideas about order, cosmic cycles, and divine favor. It is a masterpiece of ancient ideology, not a flawed attempt at science. This rational explanation provides a comfortable framework for understanding the list, allowing it to be studied as an important cultural artifact without forcing a confrontation with our entire understanding of human chronology. But what if the mainstream interpretation, while logical, is missing the point entirely? What if the scribes of Sumer were not crafting symbolic propaganda, but were instead doing their best to transcribe a history that was, to them, terrifyingly real? This line of questioning gives rise to the first and most forbidden theory surrounding the King List, the idea that we should take it at its word. This is not a suggestion that ancient Sumerians had access to magical life-extending technologies, but rather a far more radical proposition. What if the kings listed before the Great Flood were not human beings as we understand the term? This idea forms the core of what is popularly known as the ancient astronaut theory, a hypothesis catapulted into public consciousness by authors like Erich von Däniken in the 1960s. This theory posits that the astonishingly long reigns are not mythological exaggerations, but are literal, factual accounts of beings who possessed a biology fundamentally different from our own. Proponents of this view point to a consistent thread in ancient Sumerian mythology, the concept of the Anunnaki. In their texts, the Anunnaki are often described as gods who came from the heavens, beings who possessed immense knowledge and power and who were responsible for the creation of humanity. The ancient astronaut theory reinterprets these gods not as supernatural deities, but as advanced extraterrestrial visitors. Within this framework, the kings on the list with reigns spanning tens of thousands of years were not human monarchs at all. They were these Anunnaki, or perhaps hybrid offspring created from the genetic material of these visitors and early Homo sapiens. Their incredible longevity is explained not by magic, but by a vastly superior understanding of genetics, biology, and medicine, a technology that would appear godlike to a primitive human society. The King List, then, becomes a corrupted historical record of an extraterrestrial administration on Earth. The most compelling piece of evidence for this theory, according to its supporters, is the dramatic and abrupt change in reign lengths immediately after the Great Flood. The pre-flood kings rule for periods averaging 30,000 years. After the deluge, the first king of Kish rules for 1,200 years, a significant drop. This pattern continues, with reign length steadily decreasing over generations until they eventually fall within a normal human range. This is not presented as a smooth, symbolic decline, but as a sharp, data-driven inflection point. For literalists, this points directly to a catastrophic genetic event. They propose that the Great Flood was a real, planet-wide catastrophe that may have wiped out the pure-blooded Anunnaki rulers or their primary infrastructure. The post-flood rulers, then, could have been hybrids with a progressively diluted genetic heritage. With each successive generation, the divine genes responsible for their extreme longevity would have become weaker, resulting in shorter and shorter lifespans until the alien DNA was effectively bred out of the royal line, leaving behind purely human rulers. This interpretation frames the Sumerian King List not as a myth, but as a genetic timeline of a fading alien lineage. Of course, this theory is met with immense skepticism from the academic establishment, and for good reason. It requires a complete rewriting of human history and relies on evidence that is highly circumstantial and open to interpretation. Critics argue that it often engages in God of the gaps reasoning, inserting extraterrestrials wherever there is a historical mystery. Yet, the theory's enduring popularity speaks to a deep public fascination with the possibility that our past is far stranger than we've been led to believe. It challenges us to ask an uncomfortable question. If we discovered tomorrow that an advanced non-human civilization had indeed visited Earth in the remote past, what would our ancient texts look like? They might look very much like the Sumerian King List, a confusing mixture of plausible history and impossible facts, a record that makes perfect sense once you have the key to decipher it. Whether one finds this idea compelling or outlandish, it forces a re-examination of the list not as a cultural curiosity, but as a potential artifact of a forgotten world. To truly grasp the forbidden implications of the King List, we must step directly into the spiritual world of the Sumerians themselves, a universe populated by the Anunnaki. This is not merely a list of names, it is a roster of gods. The very opening line of the prism states that kingship was first lowered from heaven, and the beings who first exercised that power are explicitly referred to as divine. The term Anunnaki translates roughly to those of royal blood or princely offspring, and they were considered the pantheon of major deities, the judges of the underworld, and the ultimate arbiters of human fate. So when the list tells us that Ululim ruled for 28,000 years, it is not describing a human king, it is describing the reign of a god on Earth. This connection becomes electrifying when we examine the names themselves through the lens of alternative theories. The first king, Ululim, is a figure shrouded in mystery, but his name and position have led researchers to draw a direct line to one of the most prominent Anunnaki, Enki, the god of water, wisdom, and creation. In some interpretations, Ululim is seen as a title or an early epithet for Enki himself. Enki, according to the myths, was a master engineer and a geneticist who, along with his half-brother Enlil, played a pivotal role in the creation of humanity. The theory posits that these incredibly long reigns are a perfect record of an extraterrestrial administration because the administrators were not subject to human lifespans. They were beings from another world, perhaps from the mythical planet Nibiru as described in later Babylonian astronomy, possessing a biology and technology that allowed them to live for millennia. The narrative woven by these theorists is both grand and startling. It suggests that the Anunnaki came to Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago seeking mineral resources, most notably gold, which was needed to repair the atmosphere of their own dying planet. The immense time spans of the King List, therefore, accurately reflect the duration of this mining operation. The labor force for this endeavor was created by the gods themselves. Ancient texts like the Atrahasis epic describe how the Anunnaki grew weary of their toil and rebelled, leading the wise Enki to propose a solution: the genetic engineering of a primitive worker. By mixing the essence of the Anunnaki with that of the existing hominid on Earth, Homo erectus, they created Homo sapiens, us. Humanity was literally bred for labor. This provides a shocking but internally consistent explanation for the King List's most baffling feature: the dramatic shortening of rains after the Great Flood. The flood, in this scenario, was a real cataclysm, possibly a natural disaster or even a weapon used in a conflict between the Anunnaki factions. It wiped out much of the primordial human population and likely devastated the Anunnaki's infrastructure. The post-flood kings, beginning with Joshua of Kish, who ruled for 1200 years, could represent a new order. Perhaps they were hybrid rulers, offspring of the Anunnaki and human survivors, who possessed diluted longevity genes. With each successive generation, this alien heritage waned, causing lifespans to precipitously decline from thousands of years to mere centuries, and finally to the decades we know today. The list then becomes a genetic clock, tracing the gradual fading of our Creator's direct influence on Earth. It's a story of a planned species, a great cataclysm, and a slow return to a purely biological destiny, all encoded in a simple list of kings and their years. Yet, if we are to entertain the possibility that the King List contains a kernel of truth, we must step away from ancient mythology and into the modern laboratory. Is there any scientific basis, however remote, for the idea of human-like beings living for tens of thousands of years? To answer this, we need to explore the very mechanisms of aging itself. Modern science tells us that aging is not a single, mysterious process, but a complex interplay of genetic and cellular decay. At the very tips of our chromosomes are protective caps called telomeres. Think of them like the plastic aglets on the ends of your shoelaces. They prevent the strands from fraying. Each time a cell divides, these telomeres get a little bit shorter. Eventually, they become so short that the cell can no longer divide properly. It enters a state called senescence, or simply dies. This telomere shortening is a fundamental driver of the aging process in our bodies. Now, what if that process could be slowed down or even reversed? Certain enzymes, most notably telomerase, work to maintain and even rebuild these telomeric caps. In our bodies, telomerase is highly active in stem cells and notoriously in cancer cells, which is one reason cancers can proliferate so wildly. The field of longevity science is intensely focused on understanding and potentially harnessing telomerase. Researchers speculate that if we could safely activate this enzyme in ordinary somatic cells, we might significantly extend human health spans. While we are light years away from achieving anything close to a 30,000-year lifespan, the science confirms that the rate of aging is not a fixed, unchangeable constant. It is a biological program, and programs can, in theory, be rewritten. This opens a fascinating door. Could the Anunnaki, or the pre-flood kings, have possessed a perfected understanding of their own genetic code, allowing them to maintain telomere length indefinitely? From a scientific standpoint, it's not a violation of known laws of physics, but a mastery of biological rules that we are only just beginning to comprehend. This line of thinking leads us to an even more profound variable: the environment itself. Could conditions on Earth in the distant past have been fundamentally different in a way that naturally supported extreme longevity? Some fringe scientific theories propose exactly that. They point to the concept of a primordial atmosphere that was far denser and possibly richer in certain gases or energies. One compelling idea is that the Earth was once surrounded by a canopy of water vapor high in the atmosphere, a theory sometimes used to explain the source of the waters for the Great Flood. Such a canopy, it's argued, would have filtered out more harmful cosmic radiation and created a global, greenhouse-like environment with higher atmospheric pressure. Under these conditions, cellular damage from radiation would be reduced, and the very way our bodies process oxygen and generate energy might have been more efficient, leading to vastly slower rates of decay. Furthermore, we must consider the possibility that our entire timeline for human civilization is incorrect. Mainstream archaeology places the rise of Sumer around 4,000 years before the Common Era. But what if a sophisticated, perhaps even global, civilization existed tens of thousands of years earlier, only to be completely wiped out by a cataclysm like the Flood? The evidence for such a society would be scarce, submerged under rising sea levels or buried beneath millennia of silt. The Sumerian King List could then be seen not as a myth from 5,000 years ago, but as a fragmented legacy of a much older, advanced culture. In this scenario, the incredibly long reigns might not be literal lifespans of individuals, but rather the durations of entire dynasties or cultural epochs. A later Sumerian scribe discovering these ancient records might have misinterpreted the symbols for a reign of a dynasty as the reign of a single king, compressing vast stretches of history into a biographical list. The dramatic shortening of reigns after the Flood would then represent the collapse of this advanced global network and humanity's painful, slow rebirth into a new, more primitive age struggling to reclaim lost knowledge. This interpretation allows the King List to be a distorted historical record without requiring us to believe in gods or aliens, pointing instead to a lost chapter in the human story that we have only just begun to suspect. This stark division on the list, with the Great Flood acting as a clear and terrifying line of demarcation, forces us to confront the possibility that this was not merely a symbolic transition, but a record of a genuine planet-altering catastrophe. The phrase, "Then the flood swept over the earth," is delivered with a chilling finality, signaling an end to one age and the painful, diminished beginning of another. What's truly remarkable is how this single, stark statement in a Sumerian text echoes a narrative found in cultures across the globe, from the Epic of Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia to the story of Manu in Hindu scriptures, and of course, the well-known account of Noah in the Bible. This universality suggests we are not dealing with a local legend, but with a profound, shared memory of a cataclysm so immense it was seared into the collective consciousness of humanity's earliest survivors. The theory that gains traction here is that the Great Flood was a real historical event, a global reset button that effectively wiped the slate clean. Proponents of this view argue that a pre-flood or antediluvian civilization of advanced capability did exist. This wasn't necessarily a society with technology identical to our own, but perhaps one that possessed a deep understanding of astronomy, engineering, and energy sources that have since been lost. The incredibly long reigns of the kings before the deluge could be a distorted record of this civilization's stability and longevity, a golden age where knowledge allowed for a mastery over the human condition that we can scarcely imagine. Then a cataclysm struck, whether a rapid shift in the Earth's crust, a massive asteroid impact triggering oceanic upheaval, or a natural polar shift. This event would have been apocalyptic, submerging coastal cities and fertile plains under unimaginable volumes of water, obliterating the centers of knowledge and power, and reducing the human population to a handful of scattered, terrified survivors. This scenario provides a powerful and elegant explanation for the most baffling feature of the King List, the dramatic and immediate shortening of reign lengths after the waters receded. The world that emerged from the flood was a brutal and broken place. The survivors, whether direct descendants of the advanced civilization or simply primitive tribes who lived in the highlands, would have been thrown back into a struggle for basic survival. The intricate knowledge of the old world, its science, its agriculture, its governance would have been almost entirely lost, preserved only in fragmented myths and oral traditions. The first post-flood kings, like Joshua of Kish, who ruled for 1,200 years, might represent a fading echo of that former glory. Perhaps they were individuals who retained some residual knowledge or genetic advantage from the prior age, allowing them to live for centuries and establish order amidst the chaos. But with each generation, as survival remained the paramount concern and the old ways were forgotten, that inherited advantage diminished. Reign lengths compressed from centuries to decades, charting humanity's long and difficult climb out of a Stone Age dark age, slowly rebuilding civilization from its ashes. The King List, in this light, is not a myth but a chronological monument to a great forgetting, a record of our species' rise, fall, and arduous second beginning. So if we allow ourselves to take this speculative leap to view the Sumerian King List not as myth but as a fragmented, misunderstood history, what kind of world does it describe before the waters came? We are asked to envision an antediluvian civilization, a society so advanced and so stable that its rulers maintained power not for decades but for geological epochs. The sheer stability implied by reigns of 36,000 years is perhaps the most telling clue. This was not an age of warring tribes and fleeting dynasties. It suggests a global order of profound harmony and technological mastery. Imagine a world where the very forces that lead to societal collapse, famine, disease, resource scarcity had been completely conquered. A world where energy was not extracted from the ground through brutal labor, but harnessed from the atmosphere itself, perhaps from a denser, more electrically charged environment that some theorists propose. This could have been a civilization that understood the fundamental principles of nature in a way we are still struggling to grasp, manipulating genetic code to eliminate disease and extend life, and utilizing crystalline energy or acoustic levitation to construct monuments that have baffled us for centuries. This vision irresistibly draws parallels to the most enduring legends of lost worlds, chief among them the fabled continent of Atlantis. Plato's description of Atlantis, a maritime empire with advanced technology and immense wealth that sank beneath the waves in a single day and night of misfortune, is a direct echo of the Sumerian narrative. The King List gives us the chronological framework, the incredibly long reign of a sophisticated society, while the myth of Atlantis provides the cultural and technological texture. Could it be that these are not separate stories but different cultural memories of the same cataclysmic event? Similarly, the concept of Lemuria, a hypothetical lost land sometimes placed in the Indian or Pacific Ocean, speaks to a primordial, unified human culture possessing esoteric knowledge. The pre-flood world of the Sumerian kings might well be the historical root from which all these other legends grew. The Sumerians themselves claimed their knowledge was given to them by the gods, the Apkallu, who are said to have emerged from the sea after the flood to restore civilization. This is not the origin story of a primitive people, it is the origin story of survivors. The most compelling evidence for this lost global civilization may not be in texts but in stones. Scattered across our planet are ancient megalithic sites that defy conventional historical timelines and construction methods. Think of Puma Punku in Bolivia, where stone blocks are cut with such precision that they interlock like pieces of a sophisticated puzzle, with cuts and drill holes that suggest the use of machine tools. Or consider the 3 massive stone boxes found in the Serapeum of Saqqara in Egypt, each weighing over 70 tons, carved with an accuracy that modern engineers would struggle to achieve. These are not the crude works of a fledgling Bronze Age society, they are the fingerprints of a high-level technical understanding. If a worldwide cataclysm did occur, it would have been the coastal cities, the centers of trade and advanced technology that were wiped out first. The only structures to survive would be those built inland with such immense durability that they could withstand millennia of neglect. The Sumerian King List then becomes the missing manual. It is the surviving fragment of that world's history, a record of the ruling class that oversaw the construction of this global network of advanced engineering, preserved by the few scribes who managed to carry their clay tablets to higher ground. They weren't recording mythology, they were trying to preserve the memory of their entire world, a world that vanished beneath the waves. However, all these theories, whether they speak of alien administrators or lost civilizations, run headlong into the same seemingly insurmountable barrier, the numbers themselves. How could any society, no matter how advanced, conceive of a reign lasting 36,000 years, let alone record it as fact? This brings us to a more grounded, yet equally fascinating line of inquiry. Perhaps the key to unlocking this mystery isn't in reimagining biology or history, but in redefining the very unit of time the Sumerians were using. What if a year on the King List does not correspond to our modern concept of a solar year, one orbit of the Earth around the Sun? One of the most persistent alternative explanations suggests that the scribes were referring to a much shorter cycle, most plausibly a lunar month. In many ancient cultures, the most visible and reliable timekeeping marker was not the slow march of the seasons, but the rapid cycling of the moon. A full lunar cycle from new moon to new moon takes approximately 29.5 days. If a year in the antediluvian section of the list was actually a single lunar cycle, then the math undergoes a dramatic transformation. A king said to have ruled for 36,000 years would, in reality, have ruled for 36,000 lunar months. When you convert that into solar years, the figure becomes a far more plausible, though still impressive, 2,900 years. While still an impossibly long life for a human, it is a number that moves from the realm of pure mythology into a timescale that could, perhaps, represent the duration of a dynasty or a ruling clan, which a later scribe might have mistakenly compressed into the biography of a single legendary founder. This lunar hypothesis is compelling for its simplicity, but it faces a significant challenge. The Sumerians were brilliant astronomers who were perfectly capable of distinguishing between lunar and solar cycles. They developed sophisticated calendars that reconciled the two, and their administrative documents are precise in their use of time units. It seems unlikely that such a fundamental misunderstanding would be baked into their most important historical document. This leads to an even more sophisticated possibility, one rooted in the Sumerians' own unique mathematical and cosmological worldview. Their number system was base 60, a sexagesimal system that is the reason we have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour today. Within this system, they had a special unit called the Sar, which was equivalent to 3,600. The number 3,600 wasn't chosen arbitrarily. Scholars have noted that it has profound astronomical significance. It is a close approximation of the number of years in the precessional cycle, the slow, wobbling rotation of the Earth's axis that completes a full circle roughly every 25,772 years. This cycle, known as the Great Year, divides the heavens into 12 astrological ages, each lasting about 2,148 years. If we view the reigns on the King List through this lens, the numbers begin to look less like lifespans and more like precise astronomical data. A reign of 36,000 years is exactly 10 Sars. Another reign of 28,800 years is exactly 8 Sars. The figures are not random, they are perfect multiples of this fundamental cosmic unit. This suggests that the King List might be something far more profound than a simple record of rulers. It could be an encoded chronological map, using the metaphor of royal reigns to document vast celestial cycles of time. The incredible durations would then represent not the lives of individuals, but the ascendancy of specific celestial phenomena or the dominance of particular astrological ages. The pre-flood era, with its immense round numbers, might describe a period of cosmic alignment or a golden age in the heavenly spheres. The Great Flood would then symbolize a major precessional shift, a turning point in the cosmic cycle that ushered in a new, diminished era for humanity, reflected in the shorter, more fractured reigns that follow. In this interpretation, the Sumerian scribes were not bad historians. They were brilliant astronomer priests, weaving their understanding of the universe's grandest clock into the foundational myth of their civilization. The list becomes a philosophical statement, teaching that human kingship is merely a reflection of a much greater, divine order that governs the cosmos itself. Yet, amidst these grand theories of alien gods and lost civilizations, we must also weigh a far more terrestrial, yet no less cunning explanation. Perhaps the Sumerian King List is neither a distorted history nor an astronomical code, but one of the world's oldest and most sophisticated pieces of political propaganda. In this view, the impossible reigns are not a mystery to be solved, but a feature to be understood. Their purpose was not to record time, but to manufacture legitimacy on an epic scale. After periods of turmoil or when a new dynasty seized power, the most pressing task for a ruler was to justify their right to rule. What better way to do that than to weave your lineage directly into the fabric of creation itself, to claim that your authority was not just inherited, but preordained by the gods at the dawn of time? The King List achieves this with breathtaking audacity. By presenting a seamless, unbroken chain of kingship from the moment it descended from heaven, right up to the current ruler, it creates an illusion of inevitability. It suggests that the current king is not merely a powerful warlord who won a battle, but the latest link in a divine chain of command that stretches back into the immemorial past. This is about creating a national identity centered on the institution of kingship itself, making rebellion not just a crime against the state, but a sin against the cosmic order. We can see this agenda clearly at work in the list structure, particularly with the third dynasty of which likely had a hand in the list standardization. This dynasty emerged after a period of fragmentation and foreign domination, and its rulers were desperate to solidify their control and present themselves as the restorers of Sumerian glory. The King List served as their perfect tool. It doesn't just list kings, it presents a cyclical narrative where kingship is a single, transferable entity that moves from one city-state to another. A city like might fall from prominence, but the list implies that kingship itself is eternal, and by showing that it eventually returned to it legitimizes the new dynasty's rule as part of a predestined divine cycle. The incredibly long reigns of the earliest kings served to elevate the entire concept of kingship to a superhuman level. If the very first rulers were quasi-divine beings who held power for tens of thousands of years, then anyone who holds the title of king in the present day is, by association, tapping into that same divine authority. The message is clear: to challenge the king is to challenge an order established by the gods themselves. This practice of manipulating history to serve the present is a timeless feature of power, not confined to ancient Mesopotamia. Consider the Roman Empire, where emperors often traced their lineage back to the gods Romulus and Remus, or even to the hero Aeneas, a survivor of Troy. In more recent history, medieval European monarchs insisted on their divine right to rule, a direct parallel to the Sumerian claim of kingship descending from heaven. These narratives are never just about the past, they are always about consolidating power in the present. The Sumerian King List is arguably the blueprint for this entire political strategy. It demonstrates a profound understanding of a psychological truth. A people who believe their ruler is part of an ancient, divine tradition are far easier to govern than a people who see him as a mere mortal who grabbed power. The list is a masterclass in statecraft, using the allure of a majestic, mythical past to secure a very real and present political advantage. It reminds us that history has always been a battleground, and the stories we tell about our origins are often the most powerful weapons in a ruler's arsenal. This pattern of impossibly long reigns is not unique to the Sumerians. In fact, when we look at other ancient cultures from across the globe, we find a startlingly similar theme, as if the same strange story was being told by different people who had no possible way of communicating with one another. Consider the ancient Egyptians. The historian Manetho, a priest who lived in the 3rd century before the Common Era, compiled a history of Egypt for his Greek rulers. His work, preserved only in fragments quoted by later writers like Josephus, lists the dynasties of the pharaohs, but before the time of the mortal kings, Manetho describes a period ruled by the gods and the demigods. The reigns he ascribes to these divine rulers are, like the Sumerian list, astoundingly long. He speaks of Ptah ruling for thousands of years, followed by other deities with reigns stretching into the tens of thousands. While the specific numbers differ from the Sumerian account, the core concept is identical: a primordial age governed by beings of immense longevity, preceding the era of ordinary human pharaohs. This is more than a coincidence, it's a parallel narrative structure. Travel east to the Indian subcontinent, and the pattern becomes even more pronounced. The Hindu scriptures, particularly the Puranas, contain elaborate genealogies of kings and sages that extend back into deep time. These texts describe vast cosmic cycles called yugas, each lasting for millions of years, and within these cycles they list the reigns of ancient monarchs. The lengths of these reigns are, once again, on a scale that dwarfs human understanding. Kings are said to have ruled for thousands of solar years, and the entire chronology presented pushes the origin of civilization back hundreds of thousands of years, far beyond the timelines accepted by conventional archaeology. What is so compelling about the Hindu tradition is its philosophical framework for these immense spans of time. It is not presented as mere fantasy, but as a fundamental aspect of a cosmos where time itself is cyclical and vast, and where human history is just a brief episode in a much grander drama. This shared motif of extraordinarily long reigns across Mesopotamia, Egypt, and India poses a critical question that historians have struggled to answer satisfactorily. So, are we looking at independent fantasies, each culture inventing its own grandiose past for political or religious reasons? Or could these lists be fractured echoes of a shared, forgotten history? The conventional academic explanation leans heavily toward the first idea. Scholars suggest that attributing superhuman longevity to founding figures is a universal mythological trope. It's a way for a culture to elevate its origins, to connect its identity to the divine, and to create a sense of immovable tradition. In this view, the Sumerian, Egyptian, and Hindu king lists are separate expressions of the same basic human impulse to glorify the past. The differences in the numbers, then, are simply reflections of each culture's unique numerical systems and mythological priorities. It's a comfortable and logical conclusion, but it rests on the assumption that these ancient scribes were primarily concerned with allegory, not accuracy. However, the alternative possibility is far more provocative. What if these lists are not pure inventions, but distorted memories of a real, global antediluvian civilization? Imagine a scenario where a highly advanced, perhaps even unified, human society existed in the distant past before a cataclysm like the Great Flood shattered it. The survivors, scattered across the world to places like Mesopotamia, the Nile Valley, and the Indus Valley, would have carried with them fragments of their former history. Over millennia, as these stories were passed down orally and then finally recorded in writing, the details would have become garbled. The original units of time, perhaps dynastic periods or astrological ages, could have been misinterpreted as the lifespans of individual rulers. The consistent theme of incredibly long reigns, found in cultures separated by oceans and mountains, could then be explained as independent but related corruptions of a single, true historical timeline. They are not separate fantasies, but different branches of the same fallen tree. This idea gains traction when we consider the universal nature of the flood myth itself. Nearly every ancient culture, from the Mesopotamians and Hebrews to the Greeks, the Maya, and the indigenous peoples of the Americas, has a story of a great deluge that wiped out a previous world. The fact that a global cataclysm narrative is paired with a global tradition of incredibly long-lived pre-flood rulers is highly significant. It suggests a common experience, a shared trauma that was etched into the collective memory of humanity. The King Lists, then, become the chronological records of that lost world, preserved in the only way the traumatized survivors could manage, by weaving them into the foundational myths of their new societies. The numbers may be impossibly large from our modern, limited perspective, but they may have been perfectly logical within the context of that lost civilization's understanding of time and existence. The real mystery may not be why these numbers are so big, but why we are so resistant to considering that our own historical clock might be set to the wrong time. Now, the story of this ancient list takes a fascinating turn that moves us from the dusty ruins of Sumer to the halls of Greek learning, introducing a crucial and often overlooked witness. Nearly 3,000 years after the Weld-Blundell Prism was inscribed, a Babylonian priest and astronomer named Berossus set out on an extraordinary mission. Living in the 3rd century before the Common Era, Berossus found himself in a world dominated by Greek culture following the conquests of Alexander the Great. The new Seleucid rulers, heirs to Alexander's empire, were curious about the ancient land they now controlled. For them, Berossus, a scholar of the Esagila temple dedicated to the god Marduk in Babylon, became a bridge to this mysterious past. He undertook the task of writing a 3-volume history of Babylon, not in his native Akkadian but in Greek, specifically for his new king, Antiochus I. This work, titled Babyloniaca, was an attempt to translate millennia of Mesopotamian culture and history for a foreign audience. Tragically, the original texts of Berossus have been lost to time, vanished like so many ancient works. But their content did not disappear completely. They were considered so valuable that later Greek and Roman historians, such as Alexander Polyhistor and the Jewish historian Josephus, quoted from them extensively. It is through these fragments, these second-hand citations, that we know Berossus included his own version of the antediluvian King List, and the details are staggering in their similarity to the Sumerian original. He recounts the same basic narrative, a series of rulers before a great flood, each possessing reigns of impossible length. He lists 10 kings, with the final one, Xisuthros, being the Babylonian equivalent of the flood hero Ziusudra or Utnapishtim. The reign lengths Berossus provides are astronomical, matching the Sumerian figures in their mind-boggling scale. For instance, he states that the first king, Aloros, ruled for 36,000 years. This is not a minor coincidence. It is a direct parallel to the tradition preserved on the clay prisms of Sumer. The importance of Berossus's testimony cannot be overstated. Here we have an independent source, separated from the original Sumerian king list by over 1,000 miles and more than 1,000 years, yet it confirms the core of the tradition. This is no longer just one mysterious clay tablet from one specific culture. It demonstrates that the story of immensely long-lived antediluvian rulers was a persistent and central part of the historical memory across Mesopotamia for millennia. The Babylonians, who succeeded and absorbed the Sumerian culture, held onto this narrative and considered it a legitimate part of their own history, important enough for a respected priest like Berossus to include in an official history for his Greek overlords. This adds a powerful layer of credibility to the mystery. It shows that the Sumerian King List was not an isolated anomaly or a local fairy tale, but a deeply ingrained belief system that withstood the rise and fall of empires. This connection also forces us to consider the transmission of this forbidden history. Berossus was not simply copying from a Sumerian prism. He was working from the Babylonian scholarly traditions preserved in his temple's libraries. These libraries housed thousands of cuneiform tablets, copies of copies that stretched back into the deepest antiquity. The fact that this specific list, with its specific, outrageous numbers, was faithfully preserved and transmitted by generation after generation of scribes and priests suggests it held a significance far beyond a simple king list. For them, it was sacred history. Berossus's work acts as a critical linchpin, connecting the ancient Sumerian world directly to the classical world of Greece and Rome. Because his history was written in Greek, it became one of the primary channels through which these Mesopotamian myths entered Western consciousness, influencing later thinkers and ensuring that the echo of those pre-flood kings would reverberate long after the cuneiform script was forgotten. Yet, this entire fascinating edifice of theories, from ancient astronauts to lost golden ages, collapses against one formidable and undeniable obstacle: the deafening silence in the archaeological record. If a global civilization with reigns lasting tens of thousands of years truly existed, where are its cities? Where are the layers upon layers of pottery, tools, and foundations that such a long-lived society would inevitably leave behind? This is the most powerful argument wielded by mainstream scholars, and it cannot be dismissed lightly. Conventional archaeology, which meticulously pieces together human history from tangible evidence, has found no trace of a sophisticated, global society predating the known origins of Sumer around 4,000 years before the Common Era. The timeline suggested by a literal reading of the King List would require evidence of advanced human activity stretching back over 200,000 years, a period for which we have only the most primitive stone tools and the remains of hunter-gatherer bands. The gap between what the list claims and what we have physically unearthed is an abyss. However, to simply say there is no evidence might be missing a more nuanced point. The real question is, what would evidence of a civilization that old actually look like, and could we even recognize it if we found it? We must first confront the sheer destructive power of time itself. Our modern cities, built of steel and concrete, are incredibly durable by our standards, but on a geological timescale, they are ephemeral. Without constant maintenance, they would be reduced to rubble within centuries. Now, stretch that timescale to 100,000 years. What would remain of New York City after such a span? The answer is almost nothing. Metal corrodes into dust, concrete crumbles, and glass reverts to sand. The only surviving traces might be a strange, concentrated layer of certain minerals and plastics in the soil, an anomaly that future archaeologists might struggle to interpret. If an antediluvian civilization used materials similar to or even less durable than our own, the physical evidence of their existence could have completely biodegraded, leaving no recognizable trace for us to find. This leads directly to the cataclysm at the heart of the mystery, the Great Flood. If such a worldwide deluge occurred, it wouldn't have just been a temporary inconvenience, it would have been a geological sterilizing event. Proponents of the literal interpretation argue that we are not just looking for an old civilization, we are looking for a civilization that was systematically erased. A global flood triggered by a massive comet impact or a rapid shift in the Earth's crust would have unleashed waves of unimaginable force, scouring coastlines and low-lying plains, the very places where advanced societies traditionally build their cities. These urban centers would have been pulverized, their remains scattered across the ocean floors or buried under hundreds of feet of sediment carried by the raging waters. The silt deposits of Mesopotamia itself are dozens of feet deep, and the vast majority of ancient ruins are found only after painstaking excavation. What lies beneath that, buried so deep that we have never even thought to look, is an open question. The evidence for a pre-flood world may not be missing. It may be hidden under a planetary shroud of mud, waiting for a technology or a method we have yet to discover. Furthermore, our entire archaeological methodology is biased toward discovery in specific, accessible locations. We dig where we have clues, where tradition points, or where the land has given up other secrets. We have extensively explored the Nile Valley, the Fertile Crescent, and the Indus Valley, but these are the heartlands of post-flood civilizations. If the antediluvian society was truly global and maritime, its major population centers would have been on the coast. And where are those prehistoric coastlines today? They are under 100 meters of water, submerged by the rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age. The search for a lost civilization is in large part a search on the ocean floor, a realm that remains one of the least explored frontiers on our planet. Sites like the enigmatic Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan, with its massive, stepped structures that some argue are man-made, hint at the possibilities lying beneath the waves. Until we can conduct a comprehensive, deep-sea archaeological survey on a global scale, we cannot definitively say the evidence isn't there. We can only say we haven't found it yet, and the places we need to look are the most difficult and expensive to access. The silence is not proof of absence. It may simply be a testament to the scale of the catastrophe and the limitations of our own scientific reach. So we are faced with a choice: either accept that these numbers are pure mythology, or consider that we might be misreading them completely. What if the immense spans of time are not a record of biology, but a complex code? This leads us to one of the most intellectually compelling theories, that the King List is not a historical document at all, but a sophisticated cipher, a vessel for preserving advanced scientific knowledge in a form that would survive the collapse of civilizations. The numbers might not be counting years, they might be encoding mathematical constants, astronomical cycles, or principles of sacred geometry, a lost science hidden in plain sight. To understand how this could work, we need to look at the Sumerians' own mathematical genius. They didn't use a base 10 system like we do. Their world was built on base 60, the sexagesimal system. This is why we still have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour today, a direct inheritance from their sophisticated understanding of numbers. Within this system, they had a special unit called the Sar, which was equal to 3,600. Now, when we examine the reigns on the list, a startling pattern emerges. The numbers are not random, they are perfect, elegant multiples of this Sar unit. For instance, the reign of 36,000 years is exactly 10 Sars. The reign of 28,800 years is exactly 8 Sars. This consistency is highly suspicious. It suggests a deliberate mathematical construction, not a haphazard collection of legendary lifespans. But what if these numbers were pointing to something even more profound than internal arithmetic? Let's take one of the most famous numbers from the list, the reign of the king Enmenlu, which is given as 43,200 years. If we convert that into Sars, we get exactly 12. Now, consider one of the most important numbers in modern science, the precession of the equinoxes. This is the slow, wobbling rotation of the Earth's axis that causes the position of the stars to shift over a grand cycle of approximately 25,772 years. If we divide that precessional cycle by 60, the foundational number of the Sumerian system, we get a figure of about 429.5 years. Astonishingly, if you take Enmenlu's 43,200 years and divide it by 100, you get 432. The correlation is remarkably close. The number 432 is not just a random figure. It appears in ancient cosmologies from India to Scandinavia and is deeply embedded in the geometry of the universe, from the frequency of musical harmonics to the structure of the solar system. The King List might be using the metaphor of a king's reign to record the precise timing of this cosmic clock. This idea of encoded knowledge becomes even more compelling when we consider the possibility that the list is a map of sacred geometry. The ratios between some of the reign lengths create proportions that resonate with fundamental geometric principles. For example, the ratio between one king's reign of 36,000 years and another's of 28,800 years simplifies down to 5:4, a ratio that appears repeatedly in the dimensions of ancient structures like the Great Pyramid of Giza. These are not just numbers, they are relationships. By presenting them within a narrative, the Sumerian scribes could have been ensuring that this advanced understanding of mathematics and the cosmos would be transmitted across generations, disguised as a holy text or a royal chronicle. In a world constantly threatened by invasion and natural disaster, the safest place to hide a secret is not in a vault, but in a story that everyone reveres but no one thinks to question. Perhaps the most striking potential key to this cipher lies in the total sum of the pre-flood reigns, 241,200 years. This number, too, is a multiple of the SAR unit, but its significance might be astronomical. Some researchers have pointed out that this total is very close to 10 times the length of the precessional cycle. Even more intriguingly, when we look at the solar system, the number 241,200 appears in the relationship between Earth and its nearest planetary neighbors. If the list is indeed a code, it could be a way of preserving a sophisticated heliocentric model of the solar system, knowledge that was supposedly lost until Copernicus and Galileo thousands of years later. The Sumerians, with their meticulous observations of the heavens, may have understood far more than we give them credit for, and the King List could be their ultimate backup drive, a disaster-proof repository for the core truths of their science, waiting for a future civilization intelligent enough to crack the code. This fundamental conflict between the timeline presented by the Sumerian King List and the one meticulously constructed by modern archaeology is precisely what makes this ancient document so controversial, even forbidden, in certain academic circles. The established mainstream history of human civilization is a story that begins around 4,000 years before the Common Era. This is the period when we see the first undeniable evidence of complex society, the emergence of the first cities in Mesopotamia, the development of writing, the construction of monumental architecture, and the clear stratification of society into rulers and ruled. This timeline is not guesswork. It is built upon a solid foundation of carbon-dated artifacts, stratified archaeological sites, and cross-referenced historical records. It represents a consensus view, a carefully assembled puzzle where each piece fits neatly with the others to create a coherent picture of humanity's gradual ascent from small farming villages to vast empires. Now place the Sumerian King List directly onto this timeline. The list doesn't just suggest a minor adjustment, a shift of a few hundred years. It delivers a seismic shock to the entire foundation. According to its figures, the institution of kingship itself descends from heaven not 4,000, but over 241,000 years ago. This isn't a difference of scale, it's a difference of reality. It proposes a span of time for organized civilization that is 60 times longer than the one accepted by science. Imagine an historian meticulously mapping out the entire history of the United States, from the Declaration of Independence to the present day, only to be presented with a document claiming that a fully functional American government had actually been operating since the time of the Roman Empire, complete with a list of presidents who each served for 300 years. The reaction would not be curiosity, it would be immediate and profound dismissal. This is the exact position of mainstream academia when confronted with the King List's antediluvian section. The numbers are so astronomically out of alignment with all physical evidence that they cannot be integrated into the historical model without causing the entire structure to collapse. This inevitable dismissal often carries a specific and powerful label, pseudo-archaeology. This term is more than just a criticism. It is a boundary marker, a way for the academic establishment to distinguish between legitimate, evidence-based research and what it perceives as fanciful speculation. When a theory like the literal interpretation of the King List is labeled as pseudo-archaeology, it is effectively exiled from serious academic discussion. It becomes something to be debunked rather than debated, a topic for popular television shows rather than peer-reviewed journals. The resistance is not necessarily born out of closed-mindedness, but out of a fundamental commitment to methodological rigor. Archaeology as a science relies on the principle of falsifiability. A claim must be testable against physical evidence. How does one test a claim of a 3,000-year-old king? You would need to find his tomb, his inscriptions, the layers of his city. For a king said to have ruled for 36,000 years, the evidence would have to be overwhelming, a continuous archaeological record spanning millennia. Since no such evidence exists, the claim is considered unfalsifiable and therefore unscientific. It resides in the realm of belief, not empirical inquiry. The stakes of accepting such a paradigm-shifting idea are incredibly high for the field of history itself. If the Sumerian King List were proven to be even partially accurate in its deep time chronology, it would invalidate centuries of scholarly work. Textbooks would need to be rewritten, museum exhibits redesigned, and entire university curricula overhauled. The comforting, linear narrative of human progress, from primitive hunter-gatherers to sophisticated city dwellers, would be shattered. In its place would be a terrifying and humbling possibility. That civilization is not a recent invention, but an ancient cycle of rise and cataclysmic fall, and that we are not the pinnacle of human achievement, but merely the latest iteration, possibly far less advanced than our distant predecessors. This is a psychologically disruptive concept, challenging not just our knowledge, but our very place in the cosmos. It is far easier and intellectually safer to categorize the King List as a fascinating piece of mythology than to entertain the possibility that our entire understanding of the past is built upon a chronology that is off by a factor of 60. The forbidden nature of this history lies not in a conscious conspiracy, but in the immense cognitive and professional inertia that any truly revolutionary idea must overcome. Yet, for all the academic debates and the compelling mathematical theories, the story of the Sumerian King List would likely have remained confined to scholarly journals and university lectures, if not for one man who catapulted it into the global spotlight, transforming it into a cornerstone of modern alternative history. That man was Zecharia Sitchin, an Azerbaijani-born American author who, beginning in the 1970s, published a series of books titled The Earth Chronicles. Sitchin was not a trained archaeologist or a professional linguist. He was an economist by trade, but he possessed a profound fascination with ancient languages and Sumerian mythology. He taught himself cuneiform and embarked on a radical reinterpretation of the texts that would captivate millions and infuriate the academic establishment in equal measure. At the heart of Sitchin's controversial thesis was his unique translation of key Sumerian words and phrases, interpretations that mainstream scholars overwhelmingly reject. The most famous example is his take on the term Anunnaki. While conventional academia translates this as those of royal blood or princely offspring, referring to the pantheon of major gods, Sitchin insisted it meant those who from heaven to earth came. This single linguistic shift was the foundation for his entire narrative. He argued that the Sumerian texts were not mythology but literal, historical accounts of extraterrestrial visitors. According to Sitchin, the Anunnaki were beings from a hypothetical planet called Nibiru, which he claimed follows a long, elliptical orbit that brings it into our solar system every 3,600 years. Needing gold to repair their planet's deteriorating atmosphere, these advanced beings came to Earth some 450,000 years ago, established mining operations, and genetically engineered Homo sapiens as a slave race to work in their mines by mixing their own DNA with that of the primitive hominids they found here. Sitchin's interpretation of the Sumerian King List was the chronological backbone of this grand saga. He presented the incredibly long reigns not as symbolic or mistaken, but as perfectly accurate records of the Anunnaki administrators who governed Earth during their long occupation. The dramatic shortening of rains after the Great Flood was explained as a shift in management. The cataclysm may have wiped out many of the pure-blooded Anunnaki, leading to a period where hybrid offspring, part alien, part human, took charge. These hybrids, possessing diluted longevity genes, ruled for shorter and shorter periods until the alien DNA was bred out, leaving fully human rulers in charge of a post-cataclysmic world. For Sitchin, the King List was a precise historical document, a timeline of an alien presence on our planet. The impact of the Earth Chronicles on popular culture cannot be overstated. Sitchin's books sold millions of copies worldwide and were translated into dozens of languages. He gave a name and a detailed, thrilling narrative to what had been a fringe idea. Suddenly, the Anunnaki were not obscure deities from a dusty textbook. They were ancient astronauts, our creators, and the hidden architects of human history. His work inspired a whole generation of authors, documentary filmmakers, and television producers, creating the entire genre of ancient astronaut theory that remains immensely popular today. The History Channel's long-running series Ancient Aliens is a direct descendant of Sitchin's ideas, frequently citing him and the Sumerian King List as primary evidence. He effectively built a bridge between esoteric academic texts and mass-market curiosity, making the forbidden history of Sumer a topic of dinner-table conversation. Unsurprisingly, this immense popularity was met with fierce criticism from the academic world. Mainstream Assyriologists and linguists systematically dismantled Sitchin's translations, pointing out that his understanding of cuneiform grammar and vocabulary was fundamentally flawed. They argued that he often took words out of context, ignored well-established meanings, and selectively interpreted texts to fit his predetermined narrative. For example, scholars state that the symbol Sitchin, translated as rocket ship, actually means the room of the pregnant woman, and his description of Nibiru contradicts known Babylonian astronomy, where the term refers to the planet Jupiter or a celestial point, not a hidden 12th planet. Critics accused him of being a modern myth-maker, weaving a science fiction tale from misunderstood ancient poetry. The divide was absolute. To his followers, Sitchin was a courageous truth-teller challenging a closed-minded establishment. To academics, he was a purveyor of pseudoscience whose compelling stories did a disservice to genuine understanding of the ancient world. Regardless of where one stands on the validity of his theories, Zecharia Sitchin's role is undeniable. He permanently cemented the Sumerian King List in the imagination of the public as a document of profound mystery. He forced a conversation, however contentious, about the possibility that our past is far stranger than we are taught. By popularizing the idea that ancient texts might be read not as myth but as literal history, he challenged the very methods we use to interpret the past. Whether viewed as a visionary or a fabulist, his work ensured that the list of kings with impossible reigns would continue to haunt our search for origins, standing as an enduring monument to the human desire to find a grander, more extraordinary story behind our humble beginnings. Of course, the most grounded response to these extraordinary theories comes directly from the scholars who have dedicated their lives to deciphering the actual language and culture of ancient Mesopotamia. These Assyriologists and historians offer a powerful rebuttal that begins with a simple yet profound question. What if we are reading it wrong? The fundamental challenge lies in the act of translation itself. Cuneiform is not a simple alphabet. It's a complex script where a single sign can have multiple meanings depending on the context. A symbol that represents a number could also represent a word or a concept. The idea that a modern interpreter like Zecharia Sitchin could correctly translate these texts without the decades of specialized training that mainstream scholars undergo is, from their perspective, highly suspect. They argue that alternative theories often cherry-pick individual signs while ignoring the grammatical rules and literary conventions that give those signs their true meaning. It's like taking a single word out of a Shakespearean sonnet and insisting it proves the play is about spaceships while ignoring the surrounding poetry that clearly describes a love story. The scholarly consensus is that the translations supporting ancient astronaut theories are based on fundamental misunderstandings of the Sumerian language, twisting poetic metaphors into literal science fiction narratives. Beyond the words themselves, there is the crucial issue of context. Modern readers have a tendency to project our own concepts of history and record-keeping onto ancient peoples. We assume that a king list must function like a modern-day almanac or a database, a straightforward chronological record. But for the Sumerians, the purpose of such a text was likely very different. It was less about factual accuracy and more about establishing ideological and theological order. A major point of contention is the list structure, which presents kingship as a single, unbroken line that moves sequentially from one city to another. Historians point out that this is almost certainly a political fabrication. In reality, these powerful city-states like Uruk, and Kish were often contemporaries, fiercely competing for power and influence for centuries. They did not politely wait their turn for kingship to be bestowed upon them. The king list smooths over this messy, simultaneous history and creates a neat, linear narrative that served to legitimize whichever dynasty was in power when the list was compiled. It's a form of ancient political spin, designed to show that the current ruler was the inevitable and rightful heir to a divine tradition, even if they had just seized the throne by force. Then we arrive at the heart of the mystery, the numbers. The skeptical view provides a much less sensational, but far more culturally coherent explanation. The immense figures are not misreadings of lunar cycles or codes for precession. They are symbolic expressions of importance within the Sumerians' own unique mathematical and cosmological worldview. Their base 60 system gave special significance to numbers like 3,600, the Sar, assigning a king a reign of 36,000 years, which is 10 Sars, was a way of saying he was cosmically perfect, a ruler who embodied 10 complete cycles of divine time. It was a qualitative statement, not a quantitative one. It signaled his supreme importance and his intimate connection to the gods. The gradual shortening of reigns after the flood isn't a record of genetic dilution, but a common mythological motif known as the Ages of Man, where humanity slowly declines from a primordial golden age into the present, more difficult era. This theme appears in Greek mythology with Hesiod's works and in the Hindu concept of the yugas. The Sumerian King List is simply their version of this universal story, using their own numerical symbolism to express a philosophical truth about the nature of time and the human condition. Ultimately, from the perspective of established scholarship, the King List is a masterpiece of literature and political thought, not a flawed history book. To judge it by the standards of modern scientific chronology is to miss its point entirely. It reveals far more about the Sumerians' sophisticated understanding of power, their desire to connect their world to the divine, and their literary genius than it does about any actual, long-lived kings or alien visitors. The real mystery isn't in the numbers themselves, but in our persistent desire to literalize ancient poetry, to force their rich, symbolic world into our narrow, empirical framework. The skeptics argue that the true forbidden history isn't a lost civilization, but the subtle and complex mind of the people who actually created this fascinating document. Even when we apply the most grounded and scholarly interpretations to the Sumerian King List, certain stubborn details refuse to be neatly explained away. The symbolic reading, which suggests the numbers are mere political hyperbole, struggles to account for their precise and methodical nature. If the goal was simply to glorify ancient rulers, why not use round, fantastical numbers like 1,000,000 years? Instead, the list presents figures like 28,800 or 43,200. These are not the chaotic numbers of pure legend. They are specific, consistent, and they follow a discernible mathematical pattern, predominantly based on multiples of the sacred Sumerian unit, the Sar, of 3,600. This consistency across different cities and eras suggests a deliberate calculation, a system behind the numbers that feels more like a preserved record than a whimsical invention. This systematic quality becomes even more puzzling when we examine the list's most dramatic feature, the stark, unmistakable dividing line of the Great Flood. Before the deluge, the rains are consistently measured in tens of thousands of years. After the waters recede, the very first post-flood king, Joshua of Kish, is credited with a reign of 1,200 years. This is still an immense span, but it represents a catastrophic drop, a reduction of more than 95% from the pre-flood average. And from that point on, the reign lengths continue a steady and irreversible decline, generation after generation, until they settle into the realistic lifespans of historical rulers. This is not a subtle shift. It is a clear and deliberate before and after effect that is baked into the very structure of the document. If the list were purely symbolic, intended only to convey the grandeur of kingship, why create such a sharp and data-driven inflection point? A smooth, gradual decline from a mythical age could have served the same poetic purpose, but the list presents the flood as a concrete historical event that had a quantifiable impact on the nature of reality itself. This demands an explanation that goes beyond simple political propaganda. It implies that the scribes who compiled and copied this list for centuries believed they were recording a genuine transformation in the world order. The precision of the numbers before the flood, followed by a new, lower baseline after it, points toward a consciousness that was attempting to document a real catastrophe and its consequences. It's as if the list is saying, something happened that changed the rules, and these numbers are the evidence. This lingering anomaly forces us to consider that the King List might be a hybrid document, a blending of genuine historical tradition with later symbolic framing. Perhaps the core of the list, the sequence of cities and the names of the rulers, preserves a faint memory of a real, antediluvian world. The immense numbers could then be a later, symbolic encoding applied to this ancient framework by priests who no longer understood the original units of time but recognized the profound significance of the pre-flood era. They knew that the world before the deluge was fundamentally different, so they used the most powerful numbers in their cosmological vocabulary, the multiples of the Sar, to represent that difference. The post-flood section, being closer to their own time, could be anchored to more familiar, though still exaggerated, reign lengths. This hybrid model acknowledges the list's likely political purpose while leaving the door open for it to contain a distorted echo of a far more ancient and extraordinary truth, a mystery that continues to challenge our understanding of humanity's deepest past. To truly grasp the political genius behind the Sumerian King List, we need to look past the impossible numbers and focus on its architectural blueprint. The text doesn't simply state that a king ruled, it declares with formal precision, kingship was lowered from heaven, kingship was in Eridu. After a series of immensely long reigns, the formula repeats, kingship was carried off to Bad Tabera, where it remains for another set of reigns before moving on to Larak, Sippar, and finally Shurapak before the flood. This recurring structure is the key to unlocking the list's true purpose. It presents kingship not as a title claimed by multiple warring cities simultaneously, but as a singular, divine institution that exists in only one place at a time. This creates a powerful narrative of orderly, divinely sanctioned succession, a carefully crafted illusion of stability that likely masked a far more chaotic reality. Imagine the geopolitical landscape of ancient Mesopotamia not as a unified empire, but as a collection of powerful, independent city-states Uruk, Kish, Lagash, each with its own king, its own patron deity, and its own ambitions for dominance. For much of early Sumerian history, these cities were fierce rivals, competing for control of fertile land and vital trade routes. Alliances shifted and conflicts were common. The King List, likely compiled and standardized during the Third Dynasty of Ur around 2,100 years before the Common Era, can be seen as a brilliant piece of political engineering designed to smooth over this messy history. By presenting a linear sequence where kingship is peacefully transferred from one city to the next, the scribes were effectively creating a unified national history for a region that had never been truly unified. It legitimized the current ruling dynasty, in this case the kings of Ur, by placing them at the end of a long, preordained line of authority that stretched back to the gods themselves. The message to rival cities was clear: your time of supremacy has passed according to the divine plan, and now it is our turn. This sequential structure also served a crucial internal purpose, fostering a shared Sumerian identity. By weaving the legendary histories of all the major cities into a single, continuous narrative, the list suggested that despite their rivalries, they were all part of a greater whole. A citizen of Uruk could see that their city had once held kingship, and a citizen of Kish could see the same. This created a sense of common heritage and destiny, a cultural bond that may have helped the various city-states cooperate against external threats. The movement of kingship from city to city implies a cyclical view of history and power, a concept that would have been comforting in an unpredictable world. It suggested that even if a city fell into decline, the institution of kingship was eternal, and their time of glory might come again. The list was more than a record. It was a tool of statecraft, using the past to shape the political realities of the present. The enduring fascination with the Sumerian King List is perhaps most powerfully demonstrated not in academic journals, but in its pervasive influence on our modern storytelling. This ancient text, with its tantalizing hints of god-kings and antediluvian epochs, has become a fertile seedbed for creators of science fiction, fantasy, and speculative history, providing a pseudo-historical backbone for narratives that explore humanity's most profound questions. One of the most direct and influential adoptions of this mythology is found in the blockbuster film and television franchise Stargate. The entire premise of Stargate SG-1 hinges on the idea that the gods of ancient Earth were not deities at all, but powerful extraterrestrial beings who posed as gods to subjugate early human populations. The show's primary antagonists, the Goa'uld, are a direct fictionalization of the Anunnaki concept. These parasitic aliens take human hosts, possess advanced technology that seems like magic, and their ruling system bears the unmistakable imprint of the King List structure. The Goa'uld system lords, with their impossibly long lives spanning thousands of years, they're squabbling over territories that correspond to ancient earthly domains, and their claim of divine right, are a perfect modern analog for the Sumerian antediluvian kings. The franchise cleverly uses this framework to explain the similarities in myths across different cultures, suggesting that these were not independent developments but the result of a single, hidden history of alien intervention. A theory that owes a great debt to the forbidden interpretations of the Sumerian record. This theme of a hidden history encoded in ancient artifacts is central to the immensely popular Assassin's Creed video game series. While not directly quoting the King List, the games are built upon the same core premise, that a vastly advanced pre-human civilization, often referred to as the Isu, or those who came before, existed tens of thousands of years ago and were destroyed by a global cataclysm. The Isu possessed technology so advanced it was indistinguishable from magic or divinity, and they created humanity as a slave species. This narrative is a clear echo of the ancient astronaut interpretation of Sumerian texts. The games explore the aftermath of this cataclysm, depicting a world where humanity has risen from the ashes, its history fractured and forgotten, while a secret war is waged between factions over the remaining pieces of Isu technology. The allure of Assassin's Creed lies in its promise that by exploring real historical settings from Renaissance Italy to Ptolemaic Egypt, players can uncover the truth behind this conspiracy. This mirrors the real-world appeal of the King List itself. It offers the thrill of a puzzle, a chance to peek behind the curtain of official history and discover that our past is far more epic and mysterious than we ever imagined. Beyond these direct narrative parallels, the King List's influence can be felt in the broader tropes that now dominate speculative fiction. The entire Ancient Aliens genre, popularized by television shows like Ancient Aliens, uses the Sumerian text as a primary source. The idea that human civilization was jump-started by extraterrestrial visitors, that our religions are misunderstandings of advanced technology, and that a great flood was a real historical reset event, all flow directly from the questions raised by the list. This has seeped into countless other works, from the cosmic horror of H.P. Lovecraft, who dreamed of pre-human cities and degenerate gods, to contemporary films like Prometheus, which depicts humanity's creators as an advanced alien race. Even in fantasy literature, the concept of incredibly long-lived elder races, like the elves in The Lord of the Rings who have witnessed ages pass while humans come and go, reflects the same fascination with a time scale beyond our own. The King List provided a template for this kind of storytelling, a document that dares to suggest that the world was once older, stranger, and more magnificent, and that we are merely the heirs to a legacy we can no longer fully comprehend. The reason this ancient text resonates so powerfully in our technological age is deeply psychological. In a world explained by science, where mystery seems to shrink with each new discovery, the Sumerian King List offers a grand, unanswerable question. It taps into a primal human desire for a more extraordinary origin story than the slow, gradual process of evolution and cultural development. It addresses a sense of alienation from our own past, a feeling that the monolithic ruins and cryptic myths left by our ancestors must mean something more. Pop culture versions of the list satisfy a longing for connection to something grander, a hidden truth that, if uncovered, would restore a sense of wonder and purpose to human history. Furthermore, these stories often carry a cautionary message about power, technology, and hubris, reflecting our own anxieties about the advanced world we are building. The tale of the Anunnaki or the Isu is frequently a story of a civilization that fell due to its own arrogance or internal conflict, a warning that our own path might lead to a similar fate, reducing us to a myth for some future species to puzzle over. The Sumerian King List, therefore, is more than just an ancient artifact. It is a timeless narrative engine, continuously inspiring new stories that allow us to explore our deepest fears and our most audacious hopes about who we are and where we came from. But what if the key to unlocking this ancient mystery isn't found in a dusty museum archive, but in the sleek, humming servers of the 21st century? The digital age is now bringing its formidable arsenal of technology to bear on the Sumerian King List, offering new ways to analyze its patterns and even search for the physical evidence that has eluded us for so long. One of the most promising avenues lies in the realm of computational analysis. Researchers can now feed the numerical data from the list into sophisticated algorithms designed to detect hidden patterns that would be invisible to the human eye. Instead of a scholar painstakingly comparing reign lengths, a computer can process the entire dataset in milliseconds, testing thousands of mathematical, astronomical, and geometrical hypotheses. For instance, could the numbers be correlated with known planetary orbital periods or cycles of known stars? Are there complex numerical sequences that align with principles of sacred geometry or even early forms of encryption? This kind of brute force analysis removes human bias, allowing the data itself to suggest possible interpretations, whether they point to a sophisticated understanding of astronomy or simply confirm the use of a base 60 numerical system for symbolic purposes. Beyond just the numbers, the very names of the antediluvian cities listed, Eridu, Bad Tabira, Sippar, present a tangible target for modern archaeological technology. While these cities are known from post-flood layers, the list implies they existed in a much earlier, primordial epoch. The challenge has always been that any evidence of such an early occupation would be buried under millennia of subsequent settlement, far deeper than standard excavation can easily reach. This is where non-invasive techniques like ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry are revolutionizing the field. These tools act like X-ray vision for archaeologists, allowing them to map subsurface anomalies, the outlines of walls, foundations, and even ancient river channels without ever breaking ground. A team could systematically scan the known sites of these cities, looking for structures or urban layouts that are radically different and, crucially, located in deeper, previously unexplored strata. Finding a distinct layer of advanced urban planning beneath the foundations of the oldest known Sumerian cities would be a discovery of unparalleled significance, potentially providing the physical proof for a pre-flood civilization. Perhaps the most exciting prospect lies in the realm of climatology and geology, which can now test the central event of the entire narrative, the Great Flood. For decades, the flood was dismissed as pure myth, but a growing body of scientific evidence suggests a catastrophic, large-scale flooding event did occur in the region of the Black Sea around 7,600 years ago, when rising global sea levels burst through the Bosporus Strait. What if a similar, though even more ancient, event was the genesis of the Sumerian story? Advanced coring technology allows scientists to extract deep sediment samples from the Persian Gulf and the Mesopotamian plains. By analyzing the layers of silt, pollen, and microscopic fossils, they can reconstruct a detailed climate history, identifying periods of dramatic environmental change. The discovery of a massive, region-wide layer of flood debris dating to a time far earlier than accepted history would force a complete re-evaluation of the timeline of human settlement in the area. It would move the flood from the realm of legend into the realm of historical fact, providing a solid, datable anchor point against which the King List could be measured. The ultimate high-tech frontier in this search is the exploration of landscapes that are now underwater. As the last ice age ended, global sea levels rose by nearly 400 feet, submerging vast coastal areas that were once prime real estate for early human societies. The Sumerian King List describes a world before the flood, and if a sophisticated culture existed then, its heartland might now be on the continental shelf. Until recently, deep-sea archaeology was nearly impossible, but the development of autonomous underwater vehicles and advanced sonar mapping is changing that. These robotic submarines can systematically scan the seafloor, creating high-resolution, three-dimensional maps of areas that were dry land over 10,000 years ago. The discovery of any structured, man-made formations in these submerged zones would be the smoking gun, the undeniable evidence of a lost chapter in human history. While no such discovery has yet been definitively linked to the Sumerian list, the technology now exists to look, turning a speculative theory into a testable hypothesis. The digital age, therefore, offers not just new ways to read the list, but new places to look for the world it describes, transforming a 4,000-year-old clay tablet into a treasure map for the 21st century. So here we stand at the precipice of two entirely different realities, each built upon the very same clay prism. This is the fundamental schism at the heart of the Sumerian King List, a divide that separates not just interpretations but entire worldviews. It's a tale of two histories, and the path you choose to follow depends entirely on what you believe this ancient document is trying to tell us. On one side, we have the literal interpretation. This is the breathtaking, paradigm-shifting view that dares to take the list at its word. It proposes that the numbers are factual, that the reigns of tens of thousands of years are a precise, if bewildering, historical record. This path leads us to a pre-flood world populated by beings of immense longevity, whether we call them the Anunnaki, a lost advanced civilization, or a species with a mastery over genetics we can scarcely imagine. The Great Flood, in this view, was a real cataclysmic event that reset the planet, wiping out that advanced society and leading to a gradual decline in human potential, a decline meticulously charted by the shortening reign. The appeal of this history is its sheer epic scale. It offers a narrative of cosmic origins and a fallen golden age that resonates with our deepest myths. But its greatest weakness is the very thing that gives history its backbone, physical evidence. The literal interpretation asks us to accept a timeline 60 times longer than the established one, a timeline for which the archaeological record, as we currently understand it, offers no support. The cities of these god-kings, their technologies, their millions of subjects, all of it has left no undeniable trace. For skeptics, this is an insurmountable obstacle, relegating the theory to the realm of fascinating speculation. On the other side lies the symbolic interpretation, the comfortable, academically accepted explanation. This view sees the King List not as a flawed history book, but as a brilliant and sophisticated piece of literature. The immense numbers are not measurements of time, but expressions of cosmic importance. A reign of 36,000 years isn't a lifespan. It's a statement that a king was so divinely connected, so foundational to the institution of kingship, that his rule embodied 10 perfect cycles of the sacred Sar unit. The list's purpose was political and theological, to legitimize later dynasties by weaving them into an unbroken chain of authority that stretched back to the gods themselves. The sequential movement of kingship from city to city is seen as a clever fabrication, smoothing over the messy, simultaneous rivalries of Sumerian city-states to create a narrative of divine order. This interpretation fits seamlessly within the established archaeological timeline. It doesn't require us to rewrite history. It simply asks us to appreciate the Sumerians' literary genius and their understanding of power. Yet, for all its logical coherence, the symbolic view can feel somewhat reductionist. It risks explaining away the mystery, turning a document that speaks of world-altering floods and godlike kings into a mere tool of political propaganda. It may answer the how, but it leaves the why feeling a little empty. Why did they choose these specific, mathematically elegant numbers? Why is the divide at the flood so stark and data-driven? This is not a mystery with a solution waiting to be discovered in a newly unearthed tablet. It is an ongoing and perhaps eternal dialogue between two very different ways of knowing. It's a conflict between empiricism and intuition, between the strict rules of archaeological evidence and the compelling power of ancient testimony. The literalist looks at the list and sees a puzzle where a key piece, be it genetic knowledge or a lost city, is missing. The skeptic looks at the same list and sees a completed puzzle where the pieces of language, politics, and culture all fit together perfectly, forming a picture of human creativity rather than extraterrestrial intervention. Perhaps the real truth lies not in choosing one side over the other, but in acknowledging the profound questions the list continues to raise. It forces us to confront the limitations of our own perspective. We are a species with a lifespan of decades trying to interpret a document that speaks in units of millennia. We are a culture obsessed with literal, scientific truth, trying to decipher the symbolic language of a people for whom the divine and the historical were inseparable. The Sumerian King List endures not because it provides answers, but because it guards a secret that challenges the very foundations of how we reconstruct the past. It reminds us that history is not just a collection of excavated potsherds and carbon-dated bones. It is also the stories we tell about ourselves, stories that can contain truths far deeper than mere facts. Ultimately, the enduring power of the Sumerian King List lies not in the answers it provides, but in the profound questions it forces us to ask about ourselves. It taps into one of the most fundamental human drives, the insatiable need to understand our own origins. Every culture, from the most ancient to the most modern, has its creation story, its narrative of beginnings. These stories are more than just entertainment. They are the bedrock of identity, shaping how we see our place in the universe. The King List is one of humanity's oldest and most persistent origin stories, and its bizarre details challenge the comfortable narrative we've constructed in the modern era. It confronts us with the unsettling possibility that the comfortable, linear progression from primitive hunter-gatherers to advanced technological society might be incomplete or worse, entirely wrong. This artifact is a permanent crack in the foundation of our collective self-understanding, a whisper from the distant past that suggests our history might be a cycle of rise and catastrophic fall, rather than a simple upward climb. This document also serves as a crucial reminder of the immense gaps in our knowledge and the arrogance of assuming we have the past all figured out. For all our technological prowess with carbon dating and satellite archaeology, we are still piecing together the human story from fragments, a piece of pottery here, a crumbling wall there. The Sumerian King List is a fragment that doesn't fit the established puzzle, and our reaction to it reveals a great deal about our approach to history. Do we dismiss it as an inconvenient anomaly, forcing it to conform to our existing models, or do we allow it to expand our imagination, to force a reconsideration of what is possible? The list is a testament to the fact that the ancient world was not populated by simple-minded people creating simple fables. The Sumerians were sophisticated astronomers, mathematicians, and administrators. When they went to the considerable effort of inscribing these specific, mathematically elegant numbers onto a durable clay prism, they were communicating something they believed to be profoundly significant. To casually write it off as mere fantasy might be the least scientific response of all. In an age of information overload, where answers are often just a quick internet search away, the King List preserves a sense of genuine mystery. It is a puzzle that has resisted a definitive solution for over a century, and this very resistance is what gives it lasting power. It invites us to participate in the detective work, to become explorers not of physical places, but of ideas and possibilities. It encourages a healthy skepticism toward authoritative narratives and celebrates the human spirit of curiosity. Whether you are drawn to the ancient astronaut theory, the lost civilization hypothesis, or the symbolic political interpretation, engaging with the list is an exercise in stretching the boundaries of your thinking. It doesn't demand that you believe it literally, but it does demand that you take it seriously as a cultural artifact that has something important to say about how humanity has always sought to make sense of its own existence. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the Sumerian King List is that the quest for origins is never truly about the past, it is about the future. By questioning where we come from, we are ultimately trying to divine where we are going. The list's depiction of a golden age followed by a great fall and a slow rebirth carries a powerful, cautionary message about the fragility of civilization. It reminds us that progress is not inevitable, that knowledge can be lost, and that cataclysmic events can reset the human journey in an instant. In our current era of rapid technological change and environmental challenges, this ancient narrative feels remarkably relevant. It asks us to consider what legacy we are creating and what stories might be told about us thousands of years from now. Will we be remembered as the founders of a new golden age or as another forgotten chapter in a long, cyclical history? The Sumerian King List, therefore, is more than a historical curiosity. It is a mirror held up to our own ambitions, our fears, and our enduring hope to leave a mark on time that will not be erased by the floods of forgetfulness. And so, after this long journey through millennia and myth, we are left standing before a choice. On one hand, we have the compelling, rational explanation offered by mainstream scholarship. This view tells us the Sumerian King List is a masterpiece of political symbolism, a tool crafted by savvy rulers and priests to legitimize their power. The impossible numbers are not errors, but profound statements of cosmic importance, using the Sumerians' sacred base 60 mathematics to express the divine nature of kingship itself. This interpretation fits neatly within the established archaeological timeline, asking us to appreciate the list as a work of sophisticated literature rather than a flawed history book. It is a comfortable, evidence-based conclusion that requires no rewriting of our past. On the other hand, we have the literal interpretation, a path that leads to far more extraordinary possibilities. This view dares to take the list at its word, suggesting the immense rains could be a distorted record of a lost antediluvian civilization, a forgotten epoch where the rules of biology and time were different. It opens the door to theories of advanced ancient knowledge, genetic manipulation, or even extraterrestrial intervention, with the Great Flood serving as a cataclysmic reset button that plunged humanity into a dark age. While this path is fraught with a lack of concrete evidence, its power lies in its ability to explain the list's most baffling feature: the stark, data-driven decline in rain lengths after the deluge, in a way that feels internally consistent and deeply resonant with our most enduring myths of a fallen golden age. But perhaps the true forbidden history guarded by this clay prism isn't about proving one side right or wrong. The real secret it holds is a humbling lesson about the limits of our own perspective. We are a species with a lifespan of mere decades, armed with the scientific method of the last few centuries, trying to interpret a document created by a culture for whom the divine and the historical were intertwined. We project our modern desire for literal, empirical truth onto a text that may have been conceived in an entirely different language of symbol and metaphor. The list challenges the very tools we use to understand the past, forcing us to admit that some ancient mysteries may not yield to our contemporary ways of thinking. The greatest forbidden knowledge might be the realization that there are ways of knowing that we have simply forgotten. This is not the end of the story, but an invitation. The debate over the Sumerian King List is a living, breathing conversation, and your voice is a part of it. We encourage you to become a detective of the deep past yourself. Look up translations of the list, read the arguments of both staunch academics and alternative theorists, and explore the rich mythology of ancient Mesopotamia. Weigh the evidence for yourself. Does the symbolic interpretation feel complete, or does it leave you with unanswered questions? Does the literal theory spark your imagination, even if it stretches the boundaries of conventional science? The most exciting part of history is that it is never truly settled. We want to hear what you think. After considering all the evidence, what does the Sumerian King List represent to you? Is it an ancient blueprint for power, a corrupted memory of a lost world, or something else entirely? Share your conclusions, your theories, and your questions in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation together, because the search for our origins is a journey we all share, and every perspective brings us closer to understanding the incredible, mysterious story of humanity.